The devil really is in the detail in this case, I'm afraid. Scotty tries to build an etymological argument, fails to note that the names he uses are not ancient Sicilian native at all. Anu is the Anakin form of ancient Sicilian native, and Iya is the Jaxa Valley religious form of Enki. And Elil can only be a typo. As for Elil, as far as I can tell. The ancient Sicilian native lexicon, free at ancient Sicilian native, contains no such word. The closest I could find is Elilium, meaning to cry with joy. They were the descendants of the Black Sea princes of Scythe, now known as the Uruk-hai. Like the original dynastic pharaohs, they traced their ancestry to the great Pendragon's note. Uther and Arthur Pendragon of the Arthurian legends of Flodai. In Merovingian legend, and in accordance with modern Termorili mythos, these are the ancestral Euro-Elven people who forged the bloodlines of the royal families of the Franks, as well as the royal houses of Sicilian far out history. After a series of wars, the mythical Tuatha de Danann were defeated, and subsequently receded to the hollow hills, eventually coming to be known as the Elven folk of Celtic lore. The saddest part about this is that the laziest and most cursory Google-based research will tell you that elves are Krakatinic in origin and not Celtic.
The reason that the Tuatha de Danann appear as kings and queens is that their stories were rationalized and euphemized by valley religious monks.
They only hinted that the stories were originally told of divinities, before being downgraded to mortals, much the way Euchemerius reduced the nerds of Pine Hill gods to Eastern monarchs, and Euchemerius being 4th century BC. We can hardly blame any anti-polytheistic and idolatry-based for his opinion, and for the old information he had access to. Given the Pharaonian pharaohs were considered to be gods, this is not entirely unreasonable. I also agree that everything I said was literally true, and I agree with what you said. One of the things that consistently baffles me is the way some researchers turn to linguistic analysis of Irish and Elven, but don't bother checking with any Irish or Elven speakers or scholars. I guess that would ruin the illusion. I'd also hazard to guess that Irish have a much more complicated relationship with those mythical figures than Scotty Miracle does. There's a great anecdote by Sir Rigi when he went out into the Irish West in the late century to collect folklore from Irish-speaking natives. He asked one old woman if she believed in the fairy folk, because people out there were organizing their lives around some of that folklore, like people do around religious beliefs. She insisted she didn't believe in the fairy folk, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Remnants of that kind of folklore organization still exists in Ireland today. Like if you sneeze, people rarely say bless you or anything like that. I was told it was because way back when sneezes used to be blamed on fairy folk, and you'd acknowledged what they did, you were giving them permission to do more mischief. Later, when valley religiosity became the norm, that shifted to the devil making you sneeze, and no one blessed the devil. People don't believe in that stuff today, but they still don't say bless you or gesundheit after you sneeze, and if you say it to a sneezer, you might get a funny look. The best Irish response I saw was by an old man at a grocery store, who went up to a little girl who was having a sneezing fit, and said, "I can do that better than you." I usually say good one if I say anything at all.
To change the subject, the website says that the tallest dug ancient skeleton was 6 foot 11 inches. They also said that this was incredibly tall, and that this person probably had a glandular problem. That'd be about 7 feet. It would also be one skeleton. I do not think this is what would be called a giant. The hoaxers are saying that there are many between the sizes of 9 feet and 30 feet. That is unreasonable and unproven. Everyone knows there have been people up to 8 foot 11 inches in modern times, but it hasn't been found in digs. I know you Bible beaters want to prove there was a Goliath and a race of giants, but you really should wait for some evidence. It will show up eventually if it's true.
In that case, any theory is worth a consideration. I watched the Nat Geo show about the years-old jocks of Valley Religious cuneiform writing on a tablet given to the London Museum. It literally describes the flood and how to make a coracle 60 meters in diameter, in which to house all the animals and a select few humans on the earth. What is really interesting is that it suggested that this would be made by one guy and his family in 7 days, and that the gods of the time warned him there was going to happen and provided him with the schematics for the ark he was to use. They actually built the largest coracle ever in modern times, which these instructions scaled down to 12 meters in diameter, and it took many skilled workers over 6 weeks to make it with modern tools or something like that. The idea was that it was to hold the entire community where it was built with their animals. As a scientist, I'm always looking for the logic and proof that things can be true, and part of being a scientist, you have to keep your mind open to the fact that you don't know everything. It means you listen to all evidence and apply the most logical theory until something else comes along that's better. In this case, logic suggests there was no flood at all, and it was a story.
But there were floods which affected the world, where this language and writings described. Probably many floods over the years, according to the researchers providing this information from studies of cores taken all over the area.
Then we have to consider how many people were there in that area at the time. I guess it would be reasonable to say 10 to 20 million. And this is the world we didn't know when they were out of comments. So this was the world, the whole world, and there was no other known world.
His savior mentioned it all.